Edward Pentin is next, but first, Mexico's Supreme Court has rejected an injunction that could have decriminalized abortion in the state of Veracruz. Had the justices upheld the injunction, abortions would have been effectively legalized for the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. 4 of the 5 justices on the Mexican High Court voted against upholding the injunction because it would, quote, greatly overstep the constitutional powers of the Supreme Court, end quote. Currently, abortion is legal in only 2 of Mexico's 32 states. Pro-abortion groups were hoping that the ruling would set a precedent, allowing greater access to abortion across Mexico. Joining me now is the Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, author of the new book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates. Please welcome back to the program, Edward Pentin, who joins us from EWTN studios in Rome. Ed, I want to start with some news coming out of the Vatican this week. The Holy See and the Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong were targets of an alleged Chinese state-backed hack of their computer systems. Now, this comes ahead of talks of a renewal of that Vatican-China agreement, according to a monitoring group, Recorded Future. Now, Chinese officials on Wednesday said allegations that the country played a part in the cyber attack was groundless speculation. The Vatican press office hasn't yet commented. What are you hearing about this cyber attack in Rome?
Well, I spoke, Raymond, to Father Bernardo Cevallero, who's director of Asia News, which is part of the Pontifical Institute for Foreign Missions, which was one of the targets of the hacks. Although Asia News wasn't, the PIM was, and he said that actually he wasn't surprised at all. They'd been sort of surveilling Asian News as well over the years, and in fact they'd had some trouble accessing their mail server. So he wasn't surprised at all, and he said, well, you know, they've been spying on the Vatican probably for a long time, and he said they're sick with paranoia because they want to control everything. So it's no surprise to him that they would want to control the Vatican as well, especially in the months leading up to the renewal of this provisional agreement.
What kind of intelligence do you think China was seeking with this hack? And might this be the final straw for the Vatican, forcing them to walk away from renewing this China-Vatican deal?
Yes, it's not clear what sort of information they were trying to get, but probably something so that they could advance their interests in the renewal of this provisional agreement. But also the other aspect to this is Hong Kong. Hong Kong's diocese was surveyed as well. And a lot of the protesters there happen to be Catholic, and so I think they want to sort of try to get probably tabs on them as well and try and control them. The Chinese authorities, the Chinese Communist Party, is very concerned about religions in general because it sees them as undermining their control and threatening national security.
There's another lawsuit alleging, and I want to move on to the Theodore McCarrick story, this new lawsuit alleging that McCarrick sexually abused a teenage boy at his New Jersey beach house in the 80s, yet there's still no word on the McCarrick report, which the Vatican's been working on since October of 2018. Are you hearing anything about this? Will we ever see this report? I was told it was done.
Yes, I mean, there are various rumors about it, Raymond, and the fact that it's progressing well, apparently, according to some sources, but others say that it's just being continually held up. And I've contacted the Vatican many times over the past few months to see whether there's any progress or whether they could give us any clue about when it could be released. And each time I don't get an answer, and others have had the same experience. So it's very strange that it's been sort of predicted to come out. Even Cardinal Pietro Parolin was very sort of confident and spoke positively about it last year, I think. And so it was big expectations that it would come out soon, but it still hasn't. And it could be partly because of the coronavirus, but I don't think so. I think there just seems to be some delays which critics feel are rather suspicious.
Ed, I want to get to your new book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates. Now, it's really a guide to the next conclave, an examination of the 19 papabili, the most likely papal candidates. Now, some are saying, and I want to get this on the table at the start, Ed, some are saying it's disrespectful to the current pope to write a book like this now. Why did you decide to write it and release it now?
Well, the main reason is really because there's been criticism in the past that the College of Cardinals don't really know their brother cardinals very well, and they get placed into this conclave, whereas they really don't know quite who to vote for. They don't have enough. They're not equipped really to know who to vote for. And we heard this at the last conclave. We've heard it before. And it's been sort of exacerbated rather by the fact that Pope Francis is not having these pre-consistory meetings at cardinal-making consistories, where usually cardinals got to know each other quite well in those situations, and those have now gone. So there's no real mechanism for cardinals to get to know each other. Now, of course, the conclaves happen very quickly after they're announced, and that won't give enough time to sort of do all the research that's needed into the potential candidates. And so that's why we wanted to do it now, really, because there's no way of knowing when a conclave might happen, but it could happen at any day.
In your book, you write, Ed, the Bishop of Rome is the successor to St. Peter, not to Christ. He is the vicar of Christ on earth, not a substitute for him. Consequently, the figure of St. Peter in sacred scripture can teach us much about the qualities necessary for a virtuous pope. How did you choose the cardinals here, these 19 men? What criteria did you use? I mean, there are 124 cardinals.
Yes, well, with various criteria, beginning with their reputation, certainly of reputation for sanctity, but also for their teaching, whether they're well known, whether the people were sort of putting them up as potential candidates. And we sort of based it also, well, we did base it on the three areas of a bishop, the three offices of a bishop, the sanctifying office, the teaching office, and the governing office. And we looked at those three areas to see whether they sort of came up, whether they were sort of qualified in those areas. And in each profile of the book, we divided into those three offices, and you get a good idea, I think, just how they fare, whether they're in their sanctifying office, teaching office, and governing office. So that's really how we came about choosing these 19. Obviously, there are others too, which are potential candidates as well. But we thought these were the front runners. But we will add to those, and I think that this book will be updated over the coming years.
There are currently 124 cardinals, as I mentioned a moment ago, eligible to vote in the next conclave. And Pope Francis has now chosen a majority, 67 of the cardinal electors, mostly from the peripheries of the world, Burkina Faso, Iraq, Papua New Guinea. So it's fair to say there will be a Bergoglio majority in the next conclave. Now, given that, do you expect a continuation of Pope Francis's policies into the next pontificate? That vision for the Church?
Well, not necessarily, Raymond. I think although that is generally considered to be likely, especially if the Pope has chosen them, I think the fact that they come from the peripheries adds a certain interesting element, a surprising element perhaps. Also, the fact that in the global south, where a lot of these new cardinals come from, tend to be more sort of conservative. And so whether they would perhaps follow the more sort of progressive line of the Pope is unclear, and perhaps not likely. But certainly it adds an interesting element to the next conclave. But I think, as the Roman saying goes, a fat Pope follows a thin one, and I think we may well get the pendulum swinging back towards a more conservative Pope, as that's what usually happens. It tends to happen in conclaves, that you have that swinging back from a progressive perhaps to a more conservative. But these labels aren't always that helpful. But I think that is likely to happen as far as I can see.
No, I read that line in your book, a fat Pope follows a thin one. I'd like to see the graphic of that. I think I'm going to put that up on the screen in the coming weeks. I like that idea. Anyway, I want to get into some specific names from the list in your book. You write Cardinal Sarah is widely seen as a possible contender. He would, of course, be the first African pope since Pope Gelasius I. Now, he is the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments. In the media, he's often portrayed as opposing Pope Francis, although Cardinal Sarah himself has said to oppose the Pope is to oppose the Church. How is he seen by the people in the Vatican and by the other members of this College of Cardinals? How likely is he as a candidate, Ed?
Well, I think there is some perception that he might, if they chose him, it would be a sort of refutation of the Francis pontificate. I'm not so sure that's the case. I think a lot of people here and elsewhere, I think, see him as very much a sort of a prophetic voice, someone who's speaking very much to people in a time when the church perhaps doesn't have much of a strong voice, but he seems to have that voice, and I think he certainly speaks against the spirit of the times. And I think I think there's a growing number, at least what I can see, of cardinals and bishops and lay faithful as well, who feel that that's needed now, that there is this sort of drift towards going along with the spirit of the world, and there needs to be a more prophetic voice, as I said earlier, which I think Cardinal Sarah is seen as providing that.
Yeah, no, he certainly has in recent years. Cardinal Pietro Parolin is also in your book. He's the Vatican Secretary of State. Now, Ed, he's currently embroiled in this London luxury property finance scandal. Cardinal Parolin is one of the architects of the Vatican-China deal. Why did he make the list, and what role do you think he'll be viewed as playing in the next conclave?
Well, I think he's seen as a sort of safe pair of hands, and I think there is a sense that after the turbulence of the last few years and the upheavals, that there'll be a willingness to go back to the sort of safe hands of the Italians. Now, I think being Secretary of State does give him that sort of seniority and weight, of course, and there have been other previous, of course, Secretary of States who've gone on to become Pope. So I think we felt that he had a certain likelihood of being chosen because of that. But I think he's considered to be, he's very respected in terms of his diplomacy over the years, certainly among the secular diplomats I've spoken to here. But of course, there are these big marks against his name. There is the China deal, and there are these questions of finances. Now, I've said before, which I don't know if it's true, but it does seem to be that either he's aware of it, which we don't know, which obviously is problematic, or he's just fulfilling orders coming from higher up, from Pope Francis. Somebody pointed out that he's not really like a prime minister, which is some people like to say, the sort of prime minister of the Vatican, but he's more like a sort of, as we'd say in England, a cabinet secretary, somebody who executes the orders of the prime minister.
Right.
And in this case, Pope Francis. And so whether he's actually responsible for these things, it's hard to say, but certainly it does seem to be that way. And certainly Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong, the former Bishop of Hong Kong, feels that Cardinal Parolin is very much guilty of the problems with China at the moment.
Yeah, no, he mentioned that on the show a few weeks ago. Another cardinal that caught my attention is Louis Tagle. Now, recently he's been appointed the prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples. I've interviewed him here on the show. In May, Pope Francis raised Cardinal Tagle to the rank of Cardinal Bishop, a possible signal of his esteem for the former Archbishop of Manila. How is Tagle seen by his fellow cardinals?
Well, I think they'd see him also as a potential successor. I think certainly at the Youth Synod, he was seen to be quite a leading contender. He was very popular. He got a big round of applause. And somebody said, a good source there, that's a sign that he's seriously in the running as a successor to Pope Francis. And we understand that he is rather favoured by the Pope as his successor. There was rumour that Cardinal Schönborn was, but I think he's sort of faded to the wayside a little bit, and that Cardinal Tagle is now the sort of leading contender as far as Francis is concerned. So, he does have the qualities of appealing to the youth, of course, but there are obviously some concerns about him too, which I put in the book. Certain aspects of moral teaching, which he's rather unclear about, but there are certain questions there, and the fact that he was the a student of the Bologna school, which sees the Second Vatican Council as very much a progressive council.
Ed Pentin's book, I should say, The Next Pope, it not only is it biographies of all these men who could be Pope, but it breaks down their moral, their liturgical ideas, their theology. It's sort of a comprehensive briefing, if you will, for everybody on what may lie on the other side of this next conclave. Now, Ed, if you had to pick or handicap, let me put it that way, how this conclave might go. Remember, Francis was selected to reform the Curia and bring a kind of South American zest to the Church. What do you think's next? If you could sketch out the man that the Church needs in this moment, what would it be?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think someone, not necessarily Cardinal Sarah, but somebody with his qualities of somebody who can really speak to the faithful, to the sensus fidelium, who really gives them a sort of, gives them strength and affirms them in the faith of how to deal with the world today. There has been criticism that Francis hasn't done that. So obviously some feel that he has. But I think that element sort of moving a bit more to the sort of the conservative side and upholding the sort of non-negotiable teachings of the faith, I think that's something that the cardinal electors may well be looking for in the next pope. I should say that, Raymond, this book, I'd like to say that this book is the work of a lot of hands. It's not just mine. And I do express a lot of thanks to all of the researchers that helped with this book. It took place over a number of years, and it's a lot of hard work, a lot of research.
Well, it shows.
And it does, I hope, give the reader an idea of who they would choose for. And I think that's what makes it important for the faithful, that they get an idea of who really could be Pope. And it kind of allows them to make up their own mind.
Yeah, no, Ed, I wish we had this book several years ago. During the last conclave, Chris Edwards, my producer, and I put together a book, and Bergoglio was he was the last guy in our book, but he was there. But we had to kind of, hodgepodge this and put it together ourselves. So this is a real resource. I mean, half of our work is done, Ed. I thank you for that. Father Antonio Spadaro, the Jesuit confidant of Pope Francis, was interviewed recently for a German Catholic monthly. And he says whoever becomes the next pope won't be able to go back on the reforms of Pope Francis. Does Father Spadaro know something we don't?
I don't know about that. I think there is a willingness among the people around Pope Francis to continue these reforms, and they're rather anxious that those reforms are not halted. And I think that may be part of this. I think there's a sense that, and it's been said before, I think Archbishop Victor Fernandez, the ghostwriter of some of Pope Francis's documents, has said this as well, that there's no turning back. But I think it's more sort of wishful thinking, perhaps, than actual reality. I think there is a sense among some of the cardinals I know that that certain things do need to be reeled back and changes made, and that it's gone too far in some of the reforms, and that these need to be stopped. So I don't know. I think it's sort of perhaps as I say, a certain amount of wishful thinking there.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of turmoil in the church and the world today. And I think I'm probably talking to some of the cardinals you're talking to, and maybe some others, but they do express a need for calm and that solid foundation to be reestablished. People are yearning for, the things they can hold on to. And right now, everything seems at sea and up for grabs. So this is going to be a fascinating conclave. And the next Pope, the Leading Cardinal Candidates by Ed Pentin, will play a big role. It's almost a handbook to the conclave. It's available at bookstores everywhere, online, and at EWTN's religious catalog at ewtnrc.com. Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ed.